everyone, and welcome to Bourbon Bites Whiskey Reviews with a gaming twist. I am Clifton, and welcome to another Thursday night live stream. We have a really awesome guest coming up tonight. I'm super excited. We've been in talks about this for a long time. Hopefully, you guys are excited too. Want to give a couple shout outs to our amazing mods that I've seen here already. Appreciate y'all chiming in, letting me know what y'all are drinking ahead of time. I see our friend Brandon, who's actually going to be joining me on Saturday in person for a live stream because we are celebrating 3,000 subscribers here on the channel. So if y'all are either watching the replay of this, which by the way, hashtag replay squad in the comments below, or you're watching this live, tune in on Saturday because we are doing a very, very special 3,000 subscriber stream. There's going to be some special bottles opened up. It's going to be a great time. So cheers to you, Brandon. I'm looking forward to that. I also see some patrons here. I see Wesley Zeller, James Taylor, Perry from This Is My Bourbon podcast. If y'all are not subscribed to him, go check him out. He was live earlier tonight. I think that he went overtime too, so that's always fun. Swan was there too, so check that out. Also see Don Nishida. What's up, Don? How are you doing? Another amazing mod, Donnie the Linux Cat, and Emily Chambers helping out here tonight. But hope y'all have something good in your glass. I do not yet. I'm about to though. But I will go ahead and introduce our guest for the evening. Please welcome Ari Sussman from 3 Chord Whiskey. Welcome, Ari.
Hey, great to be here, Clifton. Thank you.
Of course. Now you got to explain the setting because the first thing I was like, "Are you outside?"
Yeah.
So where are you?
Well, first of all, should preface it by saying it's finally spring for most of the country. I know your weather doesn't change, but for most of us, it's finally spring, the season of rebirth, and guess what's happening? The world is opening up. We're in a transitional period right now.
Cheers to that. I got my mask. I'm like, just like, oh, nope, goodbye.
we're in a transitional time. I'm fully vaxxed. Our team is fully vaxxed, and we made our first journey in like 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. And usually we travel a lot as 3 Chord as a company, very proudly blenders. Mm-hmm. And I travel around the country drinking whiskey and deciding which casks to bring back to our warehouse, our blending house outside of Detroit. And usually I'm on the road a lot, and we just haven't been. And everything's been done through the mail and via Zoom for the past long time. But we finally made it as a team back down to Kentucky. And this morning I was at Bardstown Bourbon Company, one of our distilling partners.
Love Bardstown Bourbon Company. They're doing some awesome stuff there.
Every time I go there, they're doing something new.
Yeah, I saw on your Instagram story earlier today. You guys were like, I saw them rolling out the barrels and stuff. Is there something? Is like an event going on, or is that just something you guys are doing there?
So we were hanging out there because we finally felt like we could go and hang out there and talk to them about some projects we're working on, which I'm more than happy to talk about.
Oh yeah, definitely. Give us the scoop. But we can get to that in a bit.
But anyhow, I'm driving back from there and I hit some traffic, so I'm at a truck stop. I figured we would hang out and do this tasting outdoors. It's springtime. Do it at a truck stop. So you might hear air brakes in the distance.
All good on my end, and I appreciate you being flexible. I know like it's always a tough situation, but I appreciate you stopping in. And you got whiskey there. I don't know if we're allowed to say that you got whiskey there with you at the truck stop, but there may be a few bottles that are beside you there.
I'm sure this is not the only whiskey at this truck stop.
That's probably a good point. So let's just give a broad overview for people that aren't familiar with 3 Chord. Can you just give like a summary of like what you guys are all about? You know, how the brand started. Of course, Neil's involvement with it. Yeah, just give an overview of it.
Yeah. So the company was conceived of by Neil Giraldo. He founded the company. Neil is a creative force in the music industry, and he's been that way for about 45 years. He wrote songs like Jesse's Girl and Love is a Battlefield, and is the guitar player in his family band with his wife Pat Benatar, and plays lead guitar in all those 80s anthems. And since then he's done a ton of production. He's just a creative guy, kind of salt of the earth, hardworking creative guy, amazing work ethic. So he decided at one point that he wanted to start a whiskey company. And he wasn't really sure what that meant, but as a music producer, he was used to assembling bands and experimenting and trying to figure out what eventually was going to be the vision of any specific track or album he was working on. So he brought that kind of creativity to the whiskey industry, and he talked to a bunch of people about what what they could do to make an interesting whiskey company. And when he and I had the opportunity to talk, just the idea that naturally came to us was just like a music producer grabs musicians from all over in order to create a track, a vision, something that can be out in the world. The analog to that in the distilling industry, I thought was not a farm estate distillery or something like that. It was a blending house, which is a concept in the United States that's oftentimes misunderstood. But Neil was, he's a very disruptive kind of person, like got kicked out of high school and everything. And it as soon as we described what a blending house was and why we need more blending houses in the United States, what they can provide that frankly single source distilleries can't. It's one's not better than the other. It's just a very different stylistic approach to whiskey production.
Sure.
He was on board, I was on board, and it's been a totally wild ride where we started with one product and now we have a whole slew of products that are taking on a life of their own.
That's awesome. So how did you get involved with the company? How did you guys meet, and like what was the reason that he brought you on board to be the master distiller, master blender there?
So my own story is I hated my job after college and I quit. I was working at the state capitol. I thought that that's what I wanted to do. Turns out that's not what I wanted to do. Ended up moving to France to get an apprenticeship as a winemaker. And during the time, I learned about distillation as well. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. So I was like, I'll just go and do it. And I fell in love with winemaking, and I did it for multiple summers, like long summers out in France in my early 20s. And when I would come back to the States, I'd either bartend or manage bars, which would give me the opportunity to taste these wines and spirits that I otherwise could not afford. And then I did that for a while. And then when I heard that Michigan State University, which happened to be where I went to college and was half an hour from where I lived, was starting essentially the first distilling program in the United States. I thought to myself, well, I don't really care to be a student again, but I dialed up the professor and I said, can you hire me? Can you pay me to go out there instead of me paying you? And he said, grab a mop. And I started as the mopper, and within a couple months, I was the distillery manager at Michigan State University at the Artisan Distilled Spirits program at Michigan State University.
That's pretty rare. I don't think I've even heard of any. I mean, I imagine some places in Kentucky probably have similar programs, but I have not, at least from where I'm from.
So they just started it in Kentucky. And I look forward to working with them. Yeah. So Michigan State University, if you want to Google something really weird or YouTube something really weird, look up the MSU Artisan Distilled Spirits program. The Michigan State University Artisan Distilled program. It was for quite a while the university incubator. There were a number of incubators for craft distillery. This was the one that was attached to a major research university with a full food science laboratory for chemical evaluation, sensory trained panels, multiple equipment, different kinds of stills. And we did a lot of, we just happened to do a lot of product development work for a lot of craft distillers. And then the large distilleries heard about us and they started coming in, and we did development work for these large distilleries. And I managed that distillery for about half a decade, which for me was this totally weird springboard for a aspiring winemaker.
Yeah. So do they put out any spirits of their own under their own label?
Michigan State?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Because I was curious.
No, but a lot of dozens and dozens and dozens of commercially available products were developed at Michigan State University at the Artisan Distilled Spirits program. Several of the whiskey advocate craft distilleries of the year developed their products at Michigan State. Several of the American Distilling Institute distilleries of the year, again, their products were developed at Michigan State. So it was an advantageous place to be if you were a curious type. So that's how I ended up on some list when some headhunter was looking for, a distiller. But I also happen to really love blues music. And even from high school, I was helping, I was volunteering at different blues festivals in Ann Arbor, Detroit, and Chicago, just because, again, that's how you get backstage, right? If you're a 17-year-old, I'm not going to spend $75 a ticket. I'll volunteer, and then I'll go hang out backstage, and it'll be great. So when he said that he wanted this, he wanted this company to bring, when Neil said he wanted this company to bring together his passion of music, particularly the blues, early rock and roll, and whiskey, everyone was saying, well, just play rock and roll to your barrels. And apparently that was like the common answer that he was getting.
Oh yeah.
Which is of course like complete bullshit, right? and I was like, no, if you want to like pay homage to this music that's important to a lot of people, including me, and if you wanna do actually really cool production stuff, then let's look at Johnny Walker, because Johnny Walker doesn't have any stills. Johnny Walker is sourcing spirits from 40 different distilleries, right? And if you love Johnny Walker like I do, and it's like the number 1 or number 2 whiskey in the entire world, what they do with some of their whiskeys is really amazing. It's symphonic. Again, we use a lot of musical terms in 3-chord because they work. Because a lot of the things that we look for in music, harmony, right, tone. There's again corollaries to that in smell and taste. We look for balance. We look for depth, right? We look for tone, and being able to talk about those two worlds of taste and hearing, those two senses, we're having a fun conversation in this company.
That's awesome.
And from a production style, it's very similar to the great blended scotches. And even cognac companies, Cavassier, Hennessy, they don't have stills, right? They're blending houses. They're buying their spirit from different makers who create different styles, and then they're blending those. So we do the same thing. We buy whiskey from single source distilleries, and we have blending protocols, and it would be a lot easier to sell single barrels than to do what we do. It would be a lot faster and easier to sell bourbon single barrels. But
yeah,
we're saying something about a style and a tradition of whiskey making.
And I think you made a good point earlier. I feel like the whiskey industry has always kind of steered away from blended products until recently. Because I think there's like a resurgence of it. I mean, we're seeing brands. We're talking about Barcelona Bourbon Company earlier. We're talking about, there's the Barrels of the world. There's so many brands that are doing it, and it's when you do it well that I think it's changing the perspective of what people think about a blended whiskey.
I think that's totally true, and I think when music finds a resurgence, oftentimes it does that by tapping older traditions and reinvigorating them in some way. A lot of I feel the same way about whiskey styles. And I'm a total dork, and I spend a lot of time looking at old whiskey advertisements and learning about whiskey companies that no longer exist. In the same way that a musician might listen to records of old musicians and be like, I can pick out a melody there. I look at old whiskey companies, and so there's a company that's worth checking out because it was the biggest whiskey company in the United States at two different periods between World War I, between Prohibition in the end of World War II. A company called Schenley. You ever heard of Schenley?
I've heard the name. I'm not familiar with the history of it though.
Monster company, monster, biggest whiskey conglomerate in the United States. Over that 20-year period, it was either number 1 or number 2, mostly number 1. And they had, I look at old Schenley advertisements because they were so big, they were super experimental. And they have advertisements for whiskeys that say, this is a blended bourbon with components, Kentucky for body, Tennessee for oakiness, Pennsylvania for smoothness. And what it was saying was, you can get bourbons from different regions in the country, put it together, and hopefully create something that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Wow.
There is an American tradition of whiskey blending. It's been forgotten in large part because of the consolidation of the industry, which, is only now, so long after 90 years after Prohibition, only in the past decade or so have we seen any sort of loosening of the grip of the effects of consolidation of the whiskey industry. And the benefactor of that is the consumer. We get to try whiskey styles that haven't existed in a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no idea that was such a popular thing back then. That's such a cool. I need to get on that and research that because that's really cool.
Yeah.
I saw a couple comments coming. I want to read. Thank you, Emily, for dropping the link to the MSU Artisan Distilling Program. If anyone wants to sign up for classes or to be mopping the floors and maybe get a job there, check that out. Steve A says he knows his friend at Isanti Spirits in Minnesota did the program at Michigan State. He said the first few batches even had a little Michigan logo on them because that's where they were distilled.
Yeah,
very cool.
Yep. He was great. He actually came in, Mr. Schneider. He came in and did an internship. He was there for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something one summer, and learned how to do clean loops on the fermentation tanks. And yeah, great guy. Very talented glass blower and distiller.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So this whole community formed around Michigan State. It was very interesting.
That's awesome. So Swan said you guys have an awesome single barrel program. He said he felt invited to channel his inner Ari to make a unique selection and blend. Well, before we talk about the single barrel, let's just get something in our glasses, shall we?
Can we drink? Okay.
Yes, let's drink and then we can talk
about this.
Okay. Yeah. It's all good.
Going in and out.
Take your time. Don't get caught.
I want to begin today's tasting with 3 Chord blended bourbon. This is our introductory expression. It was the first product that we put together. And the idea here was very much to take, again, 3 whiskeys, because we've got this thing about the Trinity and the 3 Chord and just
right.
3 is that's the magic number, as De La Soul says. And once to use 3 whiskeys from 3 different states at 3 different ages, which had markedly 3 different styles. Like they were different. They hit the palate in different places. And the goal was, and this took 6 months, find a balance and a harmony to it. And then add even more wood character to it, which I'll talk about how we did that in a moment. But it's at 81 proof. We've got this thing about odd numbers. Things end up being on odd numbers.
I heard about that. I watched it. So I think it was on Jason the Mash and Drum stream. I remember Neil was talking about that. He's like, they don't even give me anything that's like an even number. It's got to be odd numbers all the time.
We all have our idiosyncrasies. And, but the truth is that this is an introductory bourbon. It's met as a great sipper. Great. You can do it neat. You can do it as a mixer. It has a ton of vanilla character to it, to me, on the nose at least. And part of that is the product of sometimes we take the barrels that the whiskey comes in, we put them through a chipper, and retoast them and throw them into the blending tank.
Interesting.
Because when you take apart a barrel and you see how far in the whiskey gets, it's not really that far in. The whiskey takes very little of the flavor that's available in that barrel. And you can get on Google and you can look, if you take American White Oak, you take Caracas Alba, and you heat it up to a certain temperature, you're going to release a lot of vanillin. You're going to release the compound in wood that tastes like vanilla. And so we do that just very lightly, almost to sweeten this up a little bit. How do you make a sweet, vanilla-y, introductory bourbon? You take the barrel, you chop it up, you extract as much vanilla as possible by using heat to degrade that wood at the correct temperature. You get your Maillard reactions, just like when you toast bread, to get those rich flavors. And then you do like a secondary extraction, which is all to say that our least expensive bottle is the most challenging to produce.
Gotcha.
That's how it is sometimes.
Yeah, like you mentioned vanilla a lot. That's honestly what's jumping out of the glass here. It's super that typical, like it's like typical bourbon, but like amped up like that sweetness. I always love a good like caramel kind of vanilla note, but I don't think I've ever gotten it to jump out of the glass as much as this one. For something that's nearly 80 proof, 80.5 proof. It's nosing like a lot more higher proof than I would have expected just on the nose.
Yeah, and it does have some heat, and that's from a younger Kentucky. We wanted to make sure that it had bite up front and had one of the things that we do is, and part of this has to do with my love of growing up in Detroit. You get to try a lot of Prohibition era whiskeys because
nice.
75% of them came from Windsor into Detroit before going through the rest of the country. Detroit was the point of origin for whiskey during Prohibition, and a lot of that whiskey, a lot of the good stuff never left Detroit, right?
Yeah.
So there's always been dusty bottles and bottles of whiskey around Detroit, and when you taste a lot of these old whiskeys, particularly rye whiskey, it's more grain forward than we have nowadays. And as a winemaker originally, I appreciate being able to taste the input. Where with wine, the wood or the barrel or the cask or whatever, or even the skin plays a supporting role to the fruit inside of it.
Right.
Right. And that's just not the way whiskey is approached in the United States. It's approached that way in other countries. But I wanted to experiment with the idea of having a pronounced grain character in a bourbon, because usually with bourbon, the wood takes over everything.
Right.
The wood is 80% of the flavor. I believe it's odd that we even discuss mash bills as much as we do in bourbon to something that contribute, let's discuss what contributes 80% of the flavor. Let's discuss the wood and how the wood can be manipulated. But again, in industrial whiskey production, who wants to manage that when you can just write a number on a bottle, dump it out like a timer goes ding? That's one approach to whiskey production. And again, I'm not saying it's the best approach, worst approach, but it's a very different hands-off approach that's uniquely American.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, so we talked about like this is a blend, obviously. So it's the back, it says distilled in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana. So do you think there's like a driving force behind this that makes it so unique? Is there like one of those that kind of stands out in that blend?
So each of those, like if you know what a younger Kentucky, by younger I mean like 2-3 year Kentucky, if you know what a 4 to 5 year MGP or and what a 12 to 16 year Dickel kind of tastes like individually, really different characteristics between them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you could probably pull the Dickel out of the lineup is like, that's incredible.
That's usually the easiest one to find. But I mean, MGP though stands its own too. Then I think, especially with rye, we'll get to the rye. But I mean, I love a good Indiana rye. So, but yeah, I mean, I would say on the nose, it doesn't jump out of the glass, but I gotta give it a try. Yeah. So let's cheers, man.
Which one is that? The blended? Sorry,
blended bourbon. Yes.
Yeah. So
you don't have to drink it if you don't want to. If you don't want to get caught.
I'm gonna have a teeny little sip, just in
just a little bit. Do you have glassware too, or are you just gonna like?
No, I'm gonna drink out of the bottle.
Oh shit! Do it. I saw someone just walk by. There we go. Nice. That's how we do it here on Bourbon Bites. Hey, they've seen me chug from far too many bottles. Don't worry.
We're keeping it real on Bourbon Bites. So yeah, again, do any of those jump out of the glass? I believe you reach harmony in a whiskey when you can take 3 such totally different styles of bourbon. Young Kentucky mid-age India MGP and like old Tennessee. Very, very different. And what we did is we blended them, recast them, hit them with a little bit more wood like I described, until it got to the point where I couldn't, if I didn't know what was in the glass, I couldn't say what was in the glass. Like,
no,
I tried to get them balanced.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good tell, because I'm hit or miss with Dickel. There's some Dickel that I really like, but there's some of that kind of has an off flavor for me personally. This has none of the off flavor, and people in the chat know what I'm talking about. I talk about it all the time. It has none of the minerality that Dickel has. I'm just saying that up front. It's very balanced, like you said. I don't think any of them jump out. Honestly, if I was gonna guess, because I'm taking part in a online whiskey tasting competition that's going on right now. It's called Matt Madness. Our friend over at ADHD Whiskey is doing. I finished. I'm advanced to the next round. That's what I'm trying to say. But part of that is determining like where whiskey's from.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, can I ask a question about that?
Go for it. Yeah.
Because I think there's a huge lack of sensory training among the enthusiastic, the bourbon enthusiast community.
Mm-hmm.
And as again, having a being familiar with wine and understanding that wines have a lot of different character based on where they are grown, there's an ongoing conversation about terroir in whiskey. And it would be really interesting. You can tell the difference. Like when I go around and taste different barrels of different distilleries, one of the main differences that I can taste is the difference in cooper. I can't always tell you which cooper it is, but if you taste two whiskeys and the wood character is vastly different.
Wow. I'm not that advanced.
what I'd say is where the whiskey is distilled is going to have the least impact on flavor of all of the major things that affect flavor. Firstly, wood, where it's from, how it was aged, like that's going to be 80% of the flavor. Where it was distilled, you can put an identical still in two different places, and there's going to be no difference in those two. Of course, all the proofing water goes through RO filters, so that's not a variable. Yeah, that's a constant.
But would you
yeast strain is going to be the biggest driver probably of difference, but that doesn't have anything to do with where the place is, where the distiller is.
I would also argue though, I feel like certain regions have a typical style. Like we look at Texas whiskey, that super fast like oaking that happens with Texas. I feel like a lot of Texas whiskey has a style. Tennessee whiskey is a little more varied. I don't think there's a certain style to it. So I definitely see that. I guess I meant more of like which one's Dickel, which one's MGP. I feel like I'm a little better at that. Maybe not necessarily like Tennessee or Indiana. I mean, there's not very many options in Indiana, but yeah, no. So, but I get what you're saying though. For sure.
I wish there were more. As a blender, and I distill, but that's not at all part of the project. We have some distillation projects in the works, but we're primarily blenders. But as a blender, we benefit from having as many colors on our palate, as many whiskeys available as possible. So one thing about our blended, it's all from the Ohio River Valley, Indiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky. These places are not far apart at all. Right. Those places are a style. Right? In my opinion. Whiskey might be made differently in Pennsylvania because it's maybe more rye dominant because rye grows up there really well. Yeah. You can't grow rye in Kentucky. Right. I was at Bardstown Bourbon Company this morning, and they're not getting their rye from the local farmer because it doesn't grow well there. It grows well in the Northlands where I am.
I saw. I'm scrolling back. I missed a comment from our friend Donnie. He says his favorite 3-chord is an almost 17-year finish in Pinot Noir barrels from Caesars in Memphis. Holy crap, 17 years! So you guys are getting some older stuff that you're able to pull from.
So there is a perception that sometimes there's a perception that a brand that associates itself with something frivolous like rock and roll or music is going to really ride the coattails of that, and it's going to be like a rock and roll brand, and it's going to be about $20 drugs. No, we're like really serious about procuring the best whiskey that's available. Like that's our job, is to bid on the same whiskey that all of our friends do at we see the whiskey that we use end up in different bottles at 5 times the price.
Right.
It's the same damn juice.
What was the price on this one? Sorry, I missed. I don't know if you said
between $35 to $40.
Okay.
The point with that is to make a whiskey that anyone can get into. It's a gateway whiskey. But no, our higher end stuff is we have worked ourselves onto the list of people that get called when whiskey gets available. And we worked very hard coming up with a plan of how, at the drop of a hat, you can procure a large amount of expensive whiskey. And so if you crack that code, if you figure that out, then all of a sudden you have access to 17 whiskeys in their 20s, as you might see in the next little bit. So in whiskeys in their 20s that are actually balanced. Which is really weird.
Well, Johnny says that the 17-year was only $69 retail. That's crazy. Well, I think it's a good point, because I mean, to get a good quality blended, American whiskey, usually a lot of that's higher in price. I mean, that's like, we're just now starting to see some of the more affordable brands come out. I mean, I had Will Schragus from Stellum on my channel last week. And that's their new budget line of a blended whiskey. So I think it's becoming more approachable.
That stuff's incredible. That stuff's incredible. It's becoming more approachable. I would push back against the notion that cost and quality have anything to do with each other. Yeah, no, I mean, for the most part, especially with newer brands too, because a lot of times you have a higher cost. I mean, you guys aren't like the Wild Turkeys of the world. You guys have a lot more overhead costs there too, and I think we see that a lot with these smaller brands that are starting up. That's true, but we also, we're not running a multi-million-dollar facility at the same time, right? So
exactly.
It's different. It's different. But still, I don't think that except in rare cases, more often than not, cost of product and quality of product aren't the thing that's correlated. A product costs what someone's going to pay for it. And the cost isn't determined by the cost of production necessarily. It's got to cover that cost. But the difference between $69 for a bottle and $300 for a very similar bottle, which go out there and check it out. It has everything to do with that's the marketing side, which clearly I have no idea about because I don't know anything about marketing. But I aside from the same juice can go for vastly different sums in the market, and it's a phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Marketing is a big part of it. Well, you mentioned earlier, you said you guys are starting to put out some of your own barrels and stuff. So I guess just kind of a two-part question. One, that's awesome. Do you guys have any kind of timeline when you guys expect to start putting that out? And second part of that question is, which do you personally enjoy more? Do you like the blending more, or do you like the distilling part of things more?
So two things. We are releasing single barrels. The single barrels that we're currently releasing are barrels that that we've purchased and I've tasted through and thought, oh, this is a barrel. I taste through barrels and try to figure out, okay, what's going to be a good single barrel? What's going to be a good barrel for a current product that we have? Maybe it's ready now. Maybe it'll be ready in 2 years. I try to figure out where all the barrels are going to land. Sometimes we get barrels that are, the thing about single barrels is that rarely do I taste a single barrel that I don't want to blend with something, because they're all interesting.
Because you're approaching it from that mindset, right? Because you're used to looking for stellar barrels to make a fantastic blend.
Yeah, but also the uniqueness. They're like people. It's rare that one has every single quality that one might look for.
Right.
Oftentimes, like, imagine a situation where you could blend two people together, and that would be really interesting.
That would solve a lot of the world's problems.
Rarely do you find a single barrel that couldn't be improved upon in some way, right? And blending gives you the tools and the techniques to do just that. Use a graduated cylinder, and you make 5 different blends, and you figure out which one's closest, and then you make 5 blends that are within a tighter range, and you sleep on it for a month. So yeah, that's it. What was the second part? What do I like more, blending or distilling?
Yeah.
Very different. Very different. What we say is that
sure.
Distilling starts where brewing stops. Have you ever heard that? So brewers take grain and they turn it into beer.
Right.
Brewers stop there, but distillers start there.
Gotcha. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Blending starts where distilling stops. It's the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Also, distilling, if done correctly, should involve very few choices by the technician on the still. It should be dialed in and consistent.
Yeah.
The product should be consistent. In my opinion, there's one person in a distilling operation that needs to be creative, and that's the person either doing the blending or the person doing the blending / running the quality control panel, right? Which is a pretty critical part of it. So distilling is awesome. I love distilling, not because of the turning of the knobs. Knobs are really fun to turn and everything.
Yeah.
Distilling's great. Blending, but when you distill, you do have to wait a long time before you figure out what is actually coming of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Distilling is sad. You spend all this time and energy making the product, and then you send it away, and you cross your fingers. Now, in American whiskey tradition, that's all you do until the clock strikes 4 years in one day.
Right.
That's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the old world blending tradition, which is now becoming, taking root in the United States again after a period of having not been around, the blending allows you to do in a much shorter time span a lot more creative work than distilling ever lets you do.
Yeah, it's like immediate gratification almost.
Totally unique product, right?
Yeah.
If you want, you can do it in 10 minutes if you don't care, right? If you want to do it right, you can spend a month making a blend that took years, sometimes more than a decade, right, to actually create the inputs for. So it's that much of a different process.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I never thought of it like putting it in like waiting 4 years, or just like putting it into a cylinder and just like making your blend right there. We're talking about like creativity, like, music and all that kind of ties together. You don't write a song and wait 4 years. I guess I don't know. I'm not a musician, so I don't know, but it's like kind of like an album cycle maybe. But like this is like more immediate. It's like you put it out and it's just like in the world.
I read that Leonard Cohen would write lyrics and then put them in a shelf for a year and then come back to them.
Just let them maybe there's something to
it. So again, the creative forces, yeah. So it's very different. It's totally different. That being said, can we move on to rye, and can I talk about how awesome rye is?
Great segue. I already have the cork off. I'm ready to pour the rye.
So rye is my favorite whiskey in general. It's a son of a bitch to distill. I don't know if you know anything about rye.
Yeah, no, I've heard that. Yes.
So making rye, you have to be crazy for a couple reasons. At every step of the process, you have to be crazy. If you have an acre of land, if you grow corn on that or rye on that, like just that acre of land will produce like twice as much bourbon as it will rye, because corn has a lot more starch than rye does.
Right.
Corn will produce more. Corn is actually cheaper to purchase because it's subsidized by the government. Rye isn't really. So off the bat, it's like twice as expensive to make rye whiskey as it is to make bourbon whiskey, just because of your inputs and starch content.
Yeah, David just asked, he said, is the cost of making rye going up? I know it's always been higher, because I've always heard that it's way more. It's
always been higher.
Yeah.
My answer would be, I hope so, and I hope it's because people start using rye that they care about. I hope people start using rye with varietal names, like even bourbon enthusiasts. Like, how many I bet you have a bourbon. You've got this awesome community that you've built, and I think that most of us can still name more varietals of grapes than we can of grain, even though whiskey's our thing.
Oh, yeah. I'm not gonna even pretend like I'm not gonna pretend like. Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend like I could name all the varieties of grape. That's a good point, though.
Like, what's up with that? Well, the reason for that is because the entire bourbon industry was run by like 7 dudes for a long time who made amazing whiskey, but totally made it homogenous for good reason. So they could buy barrels from each other. That's why everyone has a 21% rye bourbon mash bill in Kentucky, because all you have to write is the mash bill in this. So, you know, the bourbon that's in one bottle, who knows where it was made? Because it's the same mash bill at different distilleries. And they're absolutely buying from one another. Nobody would ever, you know, obviously say that. But everyone knows that it happens. So rye whiskey is more expensive to make even from an inputs level. It's a pain in the ass in the still. It bubbles, whereas corn doesn't. And the bubbles can mess up stuff. It bubbles over. It scorches, so you have to clean it better. And at the end of the day, if someone has 30 or 40 bucks, are they more likely to buy a bottle of bourbon or rye? They're more likely to buy a bottle of bourbon like 9 times out of 10.
See, I'm a rye. I'm on board with you. Like, I'm a rye lover too. Like, if I see a new brand, honestly, I typically buy their rye before I buy their bourbon, and that's weird to some people. But I think rye is such an interesting spirit that usually I feel like that's a good testament towards trying a new brand.
What rye, and this is a totally easy equation.
Yeah.
What rye lacks in starch, what corn has in terms of available alcohol inside of a kernel of corn, might be between 50 and 100% more than in that rye. But all of that alcohol doesn't have any flavor to it. Alcohol doesn't really have a flavor.
Right.
When you're using a corn that is 83% starch, 17% of it is flavor. Right? The rest of it is just alcohol. With rye, which might be 60% starch, like much less, instead of having 17% flavor, now you might have 40% flavor. Rye can have twice as much flavor compounds coming out of it than corn can. The only reasonable reason to make rye whiskey is because you love the flavor. That's it. It doesn't make sense for any other reason. And as bourbon drinkers, we know that because we identify mash bills by how much rye they have.
Right.
High rye, low rye.
People say it's a flavoring grain. A lot of people say that with rye. It adds flavor.
Well, so what's corn?
A base grain? I don't know. It adds sweetness.
Booze.
Corn always adds
Flavorless
sweetness.
Booze. It can add sweetness. It can add sweetness. It can actually add sweetness at a very low concentration. The reason we use corn is because it's cheap and makes a lot of booze. What it doesn't make is flavor. So in bourbon, we need to get that flavor from wood.
Right.
Whereas
have you had a sip of your rye yet, or I don't know if you?
Yeah.
I've had a couple people call out Ryan Gill. Apparently, so our friend Adam says, big fan of Ryan Gill. He's helping spread the word in Nashville, and our friend Donnie also says he's friends with Ryan as well. So
wow. So Ryan Gill is our man in Tennessee, and he is a totally, as far as I'm concerned, world-class bourbon dude. Like wine too. If you don't know Ryan Gill, you should follow him on Instagram or something. He is like really funny and really smart and knows his stuff. And every time I talk to him, I learn something. And so he's like really great guy to know.
That's awesome. So I was going to ask. So the rye, it's not 3 different. Is it 3 different ones? I thought it was only Kentucky and Indiana. So gotcha. I mean, I think so. So with the Indiana, do you guys talk about like which mash bill you use from Indiana? Is it the 95.5 or is it the other one, the other rye one?
95.5.
Okay. Yeah, I think I can tell a bit on the nose. I was just curious about that.
So the rye is it's grain forward, I like to call it. I want to taste the grain when I taste rye. So in America, for some reason, and I get that bourbon needs to be aged in a new oak barrel. That makes total sense. That's bourbon.
Right.
Rye whiskey is way older than bourbon whiskey. Rye whiskey is the original whiskey before Kentucky was ever settled. In Pennsylvania and upstate New York, corn doesn't grow great up there. Rye grows great up there. It's cold. And the whiskey up there was not always aged in new barrels because it had enough flavor from the grain. But when the
Really?
standards of identity were codified in the Code of Federal Regulations in 1964, and they made the large whiskey conglomerates said, this is how we make whiskey in Kentucky. Let's just lop rye whiskey in there and make sure it has the new barrel designation.
Gotcha.
I personally love rye whiskeys that are aged in a blend of new and used barrels because, again, you want to taste that rye. And the wood will cover up a lot of the rye character. So
are
you
not allowed to do that in the US? You can't call it a rye whiskey with it. Would it just be an American whiskey at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not allowed to do that. So, but we wanted to make a rye whiskey in a rye whiskey that was grain forward. So it's a blend of, again, like a 2-year and a 6-year.
Okay.
Right. And by blending those, you get the true rye character from the younger, and then you get sort of the structure and the backbone, and a lot of the spice from the older. Then we rebarrel it. We let it sit and we bottle it at 95 proof. We actually proof it down and put it back into the barrels, into the rye barrels.
Oh, interesting. What is the reason to get more of the oak character, or what is the reason for that?
Yeah, so again, this comes back to the conglomerates making the rules and deciding that what they didn't want to do is buy a lot of barrels. So they raised at the time, a lot of people were aging their spirits at 100 proof. And they said, oh, if you age it at a higher proof, we buy less wood. We'll just add water at the end.
Gotcha.
What in the world benefits in flavor from adding water at the end? Nothing. But do you make a sauce all day? You reduce the sauce all day, and at the end of the day, you're like, hold on, let me just add.
That's only if you overdid it. Then you're like, let me take some back steps. But
so this notion of putting whiskey away at 125 and then watering it down to 80 and just literally diluting it is nuts, unless you're an accountant. Then it totally makes sense. But if you want a well-integrated whiskey, then you should by barreling at a lower proof, what you're doing is essentially flavoring. You're doing two things. Number one, you're flavoring the proofing water, but a lot of those a lot of the sweetness that can come out of barrel is more soluble in water than in ethanol anyway. So by lowering the proof of the spirit in there, you're going to actually be able to extract a lot of stuff that you wouldn't be able to extract at a higher proof. But again, who wants to buy more barrels when you're in the money-making business?
Yeah. That's a really interesting approach. I'm glad to hear that. That you guys are trying to do something a little bit different to kind of stand out among, all the other rye whiskeys.
Again, we're definitely not the first people to do this. This was a common style for a long time. And we just dug up the history on it and experimented with our currently available, options. And here we are.
Well, speaking of experimenting, shall we talk about this strange collaboration project? That was a good segue. I didn't plan for it, but it works.
Very slick.
So, okay. Yeah. So you said you were into wine. You moved to France to get into the wine industry. Was this did this kind of come from that passion for the wine? Is the reason you guys decided to do this?
Neil, the founder of the company, is equally into wine, if not more so.
Okay.
There it is.
Someone said they're just waiting for someone to walk by, right as you're taking that swing.
Oh yeah. I'm sure these truckers are having enough fun.
It's all good. I was gonna say, yeah, you're at a truck stop. There's probably very little that they haven't seen.
Exactly. They're probably on their CB radios being like, "What is this dude?" So no, this was Neil for a long time. When we go out and look at shelves and we see all these whiskeys finished in port and sherry and tawny and Madeira, and all these very traditional ways of finishing Scotch whiskey, right? That are cheap, plentiful. They impart a lot of flavor really quickly. They noticeably change the whiskey in a short amount of time. Neil and I both really love Pinot Noir. It's like just a fun, crazy grape that is pain in the ass. It's kind of like Pinot Noir is like rye of the grape world. in a
Gotcha.
lot of
Okay.
ways. I never thought about that before. It's a pain in the ass. Like,
Okay.
like it's much easier to screw up
Mhm.
than Cabernet. Like
Why
much
is that? I
easier
mean,
to
as
screw
someone
up.
that's not super familiar, I'm just a typical. I don't drink much wine. If I do, it's Cabernet. I'm a little scared of Pinot Noir, but why is that? Why is it more difficult?
Uh, Part of it is the physiology of the grape. It has a really thin skin, and it can burst
Okay.
open, and it's really susceptible to contamination.
Okay.
Um, and it has a very small window where it does the majority of its growth, whereas and that's why it thrives in even some cooler climates like the Pacific Northwest.
Mm.
Whereas more robust grapes with thick skins that impart dark color and heavy tannin, like Merlot and Cabernet, grow well
Mhm.
anywhere there's sun.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay.
or in much warmer climates. So yeah, Pinot is a total pain in the ass. You can, again, if you have an acre of land and you want the sure thing, you grow Cabernet, just like
Mhm.
corn. But if you want something that you just can't, that thing, then you,
Mhm.
whatever. Um, Strange Collaboration is a collaboration between Three Chord and and a winery in Santa Rita Hills called the Strange Family Vineyards. The guy who started it, his name is Brian Strange. It's his legit
Mhm.
name, and
It's a cool name. I like it.
it's a great name. And we were having a phone call. We had I had a file on my computer. It said "Strange Collaboration" because it was the documents.
Mhm.
And I started calling it Strange Collaboration, and then we were like, wow, we kind of like that name.
It's stuck.
That stuck. So he makes a great Pinot, and he
Mhm.
actually makes it in honor of his kid who passed away. Um,
Mhm.
his Johnny Strange was happened to date Neil's daughter,
Mhm.
and Johnny Strange was this thrill-seeking, very unique individual. He was the youngest human to ever climb the seven summits: Kilimanjaro,
Wow.
Everest. Yeah, he was like a really, yeah, and
Mhm.
unfortunately passed away in a wingsuit accident. He was
Oh
flying with a
man,
wingsuit. This guy
that's
was
terrible.
amazing. And he did
That's,
all these things as a fundraiser for Alzheimer's research, which was his pet project. He passed away really
mhm.
young, but Alzheimer's research was a thing for him. So after he passed away, his dad, who had a winery, started turned the winery. The winery is like a nonprofit and helps proceeds go to the Alzheimer's Foundation.
Mhm.
So we were down with the cause, and then we tasted the wine. We're like, this is fantastic, and Neil said, well, why don't we ever see bourbon finished in Pinot Noir casks? And I was like, because bourbon's a very heavy character product, and Pinot Noir is a very light character product. And good luck making the two of them come together in a meaningful way.
Right.
And Neil looked at me and was like, well, go.
Go
Go.
do it.
And so to do that, I select from our Kentucky barrels. This is all straight Kentucky, 2 and 10, or sorry, 2 and 6 year old. 2 year old comes from Green River. The 6 year old comes from Barton.
Mhm.
We're very transparent about stuff.
No, that's awesome.
Like
That's what
the
that's all
more
we
you
ask
know.
for. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
the
We
more you know.
love that stuff.
And then we age it in Strange Family Vineyard casks, and that held their Pinot Noir. And I select barrels specifically on low fusel oil content. So I really want this some of the subtleties of the grape
Mhm.
to come through. It turned out that fusel oils totally obscured them. Fusel oils
Really.
they're really great in older whiskeys, and in younger whiskeys they're really bad, in my
Mhm.
opinion. Um, they evolve into other things that are really cool over time, but in younger whiskeys they can be out of balance. Um, so I find casks that have low fusel oil content, which I then give a light filtration to pull out even more, and then we put them in the casks to let them pick up that a little bit of Pinot character.
Yeah, I was gonna say it kind of has that tart fruitiness that you kind of typically get from a wine on the nose, at least.
Yeah, so I love that uh, that kind of wine acidity, like a
Mhm.
little bit of acidity and tartness that it gets from it. And to me, that's really, I've always felt like that was a playful characteristic of like a little
Mhm.
bit of tartness, just like a little pinch. I always found that really playful.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and try it. I know you've already taken a sip, but if you want to take another sip, let's go ahead and try this
I'll
one.
have a teeny sip.
Okay. Cheers, man. This is such a cool concept. I have not had a Pinot finished as far as I know. These guys are probably going to correct me. I probably have. I'm sorry if I have, but I'm really excited to try it. So cheers.
Cheers to you. Cheers to you. We were stoked that won a gold medal in San Francisco. That was
Awesome.
nice.
Now, what's the proof on that one? That drink's pretty hot.
99 proof. So,
I see.
so we were, there was the urge to drop the proof because it allowed the Pinot to come out more. But
I'm against dropping proof. I'm a bit of a high proof guy, so I appreciate it.
Yeah. So in fact, this is even 4 proof higher than the rye whiskey. Mm-hmm. This is a legit 99 proof Kentucky straight whiskey aged in a Pinot Noir cask. And people, there's a reason why this was pretty experimental. Mm-hmm. Turned out it got a bunch of great ratings and then won gold medal and took on a life of its own. And again, I think ratings are bullshit, but they do inspire people to open their mind to try something that they might not otherwise try. And it helps with certain confirmation bias and things like that. I don't see them as arbiters of quality, is what I'm saying. They can help psychologically, but they're not arbiters of quality. But this makes a kick-ass Manhattan.
Oh, that does sound really good. I saw you did a video on your channel. You did an old fashioned with it, but man, I could see that. I could definitely see you need to do a follow up video with the Manhattan because I think this would be an amazing Manhattan.
So I love it in the Manhattan because it's just great.
Yeah. Well, our friend James, he said lots of spice, heat and pepper spice. Honestly, even though I could tell that it was higher proof, I do think that maybe it's the wine finish is giving it like a more balanced approach. It's not like super spicy. Like sometimes at that 100 proof range, there's things that are like, super baking spice forward. I think it has that, but I think the fruitiness of the wine kind of helps mellow it out. It drinks its proof, which is a good thing, but I don't think it drinks hotter than, 99 proof. I think it's right at a perfect spot.
Part of the intention was to slap people around a little bit with it. It is not designed to be like a smooth sipper. We have our smooth sipper,
right?
Like if you like a smooth, we've got that. But no, this is a style of whiskey that is just a little bit that is high energy. It slaps you around a little bit, and it's like totally intended to do that.
Yeah, our friend Perry says, he said I bet it would be killer in a New York sour. That is a fantastic idea. I got a whole bottle. I gotta try that for sure. What was the price point on this one? I know it's different per market. I know it's
$45 to $50.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So these are all pretty similar in price. Honestly, I honestly thought this was gonna be a bit higher. Now y'all do have some higher end products out there.
We have some higher cost products out there.
Sorry. That's good correction.
And when we release a higher cost product, it is because it was just really damn expensive to make because we don't love to do that. Like, it is a good way of building a brand to release really expensive products. If you, because that's what gets people talking. No, we have a whiskey drummer.
I've heard of it.
15-year-old straight Kentucky, which is really good. We tasted it and we thought, that's really good kind of without blending it. So we took a large amount of it and we released it without blending. We did hold back some for some special stuff that we're doing.
Okay.
Who the hell blends with, if you got a 15-year Kentucky, who the hell blends with it? But we had a vision, so we'll see how it ends up. But that's like $200 a bottle. Like, that's crazy expensive. Here is a 12-year-old, our 12-bar reserve, which is between 12 and 16 year. We have a 16 year as well.
Is that a blend? Is that like Tennessee, or is it just a blend of
Tennessee and Kentucky?
Okay.
We made it like a high-end blend, and again, it's $70 to $80 or something like that. We were stoked that it won double gold in San Francisco. And
I was gonna say I've seen the rest of the lineup in Southern California. I don't think I've seen that one. I got to keep an eye out for that one. I'm sure it's probably out here. I just haven't seen it.
So what happened with this one is we had a great plan for having it, and we totally had enough of it. And then Whiskey Advocate gave it a 94, which they don't usually give 94 points to like an $80 whiskey. And so what ended up happening was there was a massive run on it, and we ended up like moving a lot of it. And by the time we pumped the brakes, because we're like, hey, we need more of this stuff. We need to slow it down. What we learned is how to control when a product gets hot. It actually you gotta be able to manage and control it. And so that was like a learning experience for us.
It's a good learning experience. That's a good thing, but it also like I get the negatives too.
It's part of the process, right? So we have obtained more of that input. It's being blended. Those inputs, they're being blended, and we're going to do it as like a seasonal release, and we'll have more 12-bar reserve. But yeah, we kept getting calls all over the world from that one. It was weird. Really? Yeah, very weird.
That's cool. Well, I'm gonna let you go here soon. I know you want to get home, and we want to get you home safely too. Question: You teased us earlier, saying you're at Bardstown Bourbon Company. You said you can talk a little bit about what's going on there. Can you give us a teaser of what's going on?
Real quick.
Yes.
So, Three Chord is entering a new phase as a company, where in addition to purchasing large lots of whiskey that's become available on the markets that we purchase through brokers, or we work directly with distilleries and say, what's available? Or, hey, do you have any more of this? We really loved it. And coming up with a deal, we decided that we were just going to take our destiny into our own hands. And we've commissioned the manufacturing of custom mash bills of our blending components at 5 different distilleries across the country, including Bardstown Bourbon Company. So I don't know if there's any other companies that are sourcing custom whiskey from multiple distilleries in multiple states in order to blend them together in the end. But we're making some really unique whiskeys, some of which will become single barrels that are unlike any other single barrels that are out there, and some that are going to become blending components for our whiskeys for years to come.
That's awesome. That's a great teaser. It's got me excited to see what's to come. Well, thank you so much again for joining us, and I appreciate you stopping in, even though you're not at home. But definitely get home safely. We loved having you here. Where can people? Do you have like an Instagram or anything you want to shout out? Is it just a 3 Chord one? Where can people find you on the web?
You got to find us. You got to follow us on Instagram, because the stories that are coming out, like, we're doing a lot of fun stuff and we're posting about it. It's not like cocktail bottle shot, right? It's like we're actually out and about in the world now that the world's opened up a little bit. We're doing some really interesting projects that I hope you were able to follow. But yeah, we're on like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Yeah,
like I said, I was watching your story. So it's just 3 Chord Bourbon on Instagram. They check out their story from today. They posted really some awesome stuff from Bardstown Bourbon. Was that you posting it on the account?
Oh no, I don't know how to do that.
Okay. No, but it was still cool to watch along. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I get to hang out with Steve, their distiller, and just ask him questions.
He's a great guy.
About like the last 50 years, and he's amazing. A wealth of information.
He's awesome.
Clifton, thank you so much for hosting. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if there's anything fun coming out soon, please reach out. I'd love to have you back on the show and talk about whatever future strange collaborations you guys have in the future.
We have some strange collaborations coming up.
Awesome. Well, cheers, man. And cheers, everyone else. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, this has been Bourbon Bites Whiskey Reviews with the Gaming Twist. Cheers, and I'll see you guys on Saturday for 3,000 subscriber celebration.